Hello, and welcome to Invested, Advancing Women in Work and Wealth, brought to you by Baird. I'm your host, Angela Pittman-Taylor. On this podcast, we're having candid discussions with some of the most ambitious, high-achieving women in business today. This show is a resource for women who aspire to break barriers, build wealth, and gain wisdom along the way. We're hosting a 5-episode miniseries on the sandwich generation. My co-host for the series is Jalee White. Hey, Jalee, how are you?
Good, Angela. How are you doing today?
I'm doing real well. So today's topic for our conversation is caring for ourselves as we experience being a part of this sandwich. And we're going to be talking about some of the curveballs that can come to us during this time, like divorce, widowhood, and more. And we're going to explore how to best care for ourselves. And we have two excellent guests joining us today. And so, Jalee, I'm going to throw it to you to introduce them.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. Yeah, it's people that have a passion for this topic, have experienced it personally, and with those that they advise and help in their community. So I'm thrilled to introduce Samantha Russel, as she said, Chief Evangelist at FMG. Samantha, you just help so many of our advisors provide valuable information to their clients. And I love the passion you have about so many topics that are important to our clients and the way that you help our advisors engage with them at a deeper level. But today it's a little more personal, some of the topics we're going to be talking with you. So we appreciate you're willing to share your story with us, and welcome to Invested.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And our other guest is one of our Baird own, Linda Grant-Smith. Linda is a wealth strategist. She advises families on all of these topics for many years. Linda was an advisor herself and now is in that role of helping other advisors with deep planning strategies and really life planning for clients as they go through major transitions in our life. She has a host of designations from CFP to CPWA, enrolled agent on the tax. She really can cover every topic that's relevant to clients as they go through life's events. And Linda, some of those are unexpected and they are curveballs. So welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to be among you today.
This is a personal topic for a lot of us. For me, it really was something that became relevant to me in my 40s. I had a group of 4 friends. As we were approaching our mid-40s, we'd all been married about 20 years. And within 2 years, 2 of them were widows and 2 of them were divorced. And it instilled in me a passion to make sure that every woman felt prepared for those life events that might happen. And Linda and Sam, I know that you've experienced that personally and with clients that you look for. So Samantha, if you don't care, we'd just love to start with you and hear a little bit about your story and why this topic is so personal for you.
Before I was with FMG, I actually, my late husband and I had a business called 20 over 10 that we started that helped financial advisors with their marketing. And in 2020, we sold it to FMG. And it's interesting looking back on it because at the time we kept thinking, is it the right time? You know, we knew they were a great partner, but it's a big deal when your baby or, your business that you've built. And what a blessing it was with the timing, because shortly thereafter, he had been suffering from some debilitating headaches. And I got pregnant shortly after we sold the business with our 3rd child. And when our son, our 3rd child was just 3 months old, my husband was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is the, worst brain cancer you can get. I don't think there's any such thing as good brain cancer, but it's definitely the worst, most aggressive. There is no cure. And when you get it, it really is just, in a lot of ways, a death sentence, because the average person lives without treatment about 6 months, with some interventions, usually about 16, 17 months. So your ability to make decisions, to care for yourself, it affects every part of your body, the way the brain does. And I was 37 when he passed away in October of 2023, and he had just turned 41. So You know, we were like hikers and obsessed with working out and eating healthy and just like the last thing you would expect. And so this topic is so important to me because, as you mentioned, you know, at those ages, I look at all the couples and friends around us, nobody's thinking about estate planning or, I mean, they might say, like, I need to set up a will so I know who's going to take care of my kids, but there's so much more that goes into it to make sure that you and your partner, which, you know, whatever might be, that you'll have your wishes respected when the time comes. And so now I'm such an advocate for talking about this and sharing my story, not to scare people, but just to help them be prepared.
What a tragic situation that you went through, and at such already a busy time of life with selling your business, having a new baby, having 2 other children. So you immediately were thrust into that role of caregiver, as well as all of the new business, taking care of your children. How did you even find time to care for yourself through that process?
I didn't do a good job at first. I like, was not sleeping. My mom and dad are amazing, and they came from Ohio to help us. I'm very lucky that my mom was there because she would force me to eat. She would force me to go lay down the way mothers do. And one of the things that really saved me, I think, through all of that was I've always loved to work out, and I didn't have the energy to do like a hard, strenuous workout, but I would go every day for a 1 hour walk. And that, I will say, was one of the best things I did through that, was finding that hour once a day.
Yeah, it's so important to also take care of yourself so that you can be a help to others. In so many situations, people are like, no, I'm just going to power through. I'm going to do this. I can handle this. And having that great support network, especially when it's your mom, especially when it's family, is so important. So, so grateful that you had that, but also that you let them in.
If someone's listening to this and you're not going through this, but you're wondering how you can help someone, I think not waiting to be asked, because so many people who are used to being self-sufficient, they don't want to ask. You know, my friend group set up a meal train, and I did not cook a meal for over 6 months at one point. Every single day there was something dropped off. And I would have never in a million years asked for that. But they didn't wait for me to say, yes, can we? They just did it, you know? And I think that's how you can help people.
Yeah, that's great advice. I saw someone that had gone through some similar situations say, don't just ever ask me, oh, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I will never call you. But if you say, I'm going to do this for you unless you tell me not to, or here's 3 things I could do to help, tell me which one would be the biggest help. You know, that specificity, that, leaning in a very specific way can sometimes be the biggest help. Linda, I can't imagine how many clients you've helped through so many situations. Caregiving is one of those. What are some of the things that you see that we could all do to be better prepared for that caregiving role? And also talk a little bit about what are some of the impacts to women that step away from really their life to provide some of those caregiving services.
Well, Samantha, it took all I had not to shed a tear while you're telling your story. So thank you for smiling your way through it. I had 2 friends who also were thrust into the caregiver role early in their marriage. One was just 20. They had been married a year and had 2 kids already. The other friend was 30 and had 2 small children, and both of their husbands, one developed early onset Parkinson's and the other one dove into a wave and was paralyzed from the neck down. So in those instances, both of them became caregivers. The one in her 30s, she had everything financially prepared. She had disability insurance on her husband. They had wills, they had power of attorneys, the legal documents in effect to be able to step in and help. But what she wasn't prepared for was just what you mentioned, the independence. She could not let go of her independence, and she could not accept help, and she still struggles with that today. The other one, the 19, 20-year-old, she had no preparations whatsoever, but she had an amazing support network. And she also had a very good attitude towards, I'm just going to do the best that I can right here and accept the help. She developed a hobby outside of taking care of her husband. She hadn't had a career yet. She developed a hobby of creating things like bridal gowns, like very intricate, focused, hands-on things. And so that hobby for her developed into a career during this process. So your outlet, I think, is super important, what I've seen with my clients and friends. The other one who struggled to accept help struggled to find an outlet and ultimately did find yoga as an outlet for herself. But I think it's really important to be able to decompress and then refocus your energies in something apart from being a caregiver so you're not entirely swallowed.
Yeah, great advice from both of you. And I like that terminology, Linda, that what's your personal outlet, like where you
Yeah.
can step out of that caregiver role into something else. Angela, what about you, women in your life that you've seen step into caregiving role, sometimes expected, people aging, parents age, and sometimes unexpected?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said about offering help and accepting help, I think that there's a lot of, particularly when people are self-sufficient, and there's a lot of pride and like sense of identity, I think, also in that sense of independent and self-sufficiency. It can be very challenging. And I really liked what you said, Julie, about being very specific in the offer of help, that can really almost in a way provide permission to accept it, because then you're not just blanket saying, no, I'm good, I'm fine. It makes it a lot easier to accept, what's being offered. When you're the friend and you're trying to help, and it's everything just feels like you're not doing enough. And that is, you want to do more. And so, that's a challenge too. It's not as hard as what your friend is going through, but it's also a challenge, but everybody just trying to rally around and do what they can and find the way through to the other side. And eventually you do get to the other side, but it's a journey.
One of the people that Linda and I work with talks about this period of transition in any of these instances. Samantha, when you sell a business or divorce, widowhood, you become an empty nester, all those big life events, it takes you 2 to 4 years to get to the new normal, whatever that might be. And so I think a lot of the things that we can do to help people is, give them grace with themselves, that after a big event, you're not supposed to have everything figured out for what your life's going to look like, and to have patience with yourself after that for a period of time. Everything we just talked about too, I think is complicated by our just the complexities of healthcare. So you really have to become that advocate for the person that you're caregiving for from a healthcare standpoint, and be that coordinator. Any suggestions on how to help women when they're in that caregiver role really become that health advocate in a helpful way?
One of the things I was thinking about through all of this is a lot of times when this first happens to you, you get like whether, somebody has an accident or they get a new diagnosis, to your point about it takes a little while, the person who's in the caregiver role isn't thinking long term. They're like in the thick of it. They're just trying to get through the day. And so they might initially think like, oh, I don't need help right now, because they're not thinking about it lasting a long period of time. So I think making sure to circle back, even if they like won't let you help initially, they might become worn down in weeks or months and then be open to it. So don't stop asking. But with the medical stuff, I did not realize it would become another full-time job for me to, especially with brain cancer, because there is no cure. You have to fill out so much paperwork because there's all these clinical trials and different treatments. Maybe there's a treatment for diabetes, but you can, what do they call that? Compassionate use. You can fill out paperwork to have the doctor approve it for compassionate use, but you have to jump through all these hoops and get your doctor and, the doctor that maybe is prescribing the drug all on the same page. And so one of the things that was so helpful, I had a friend who, she didn't live in my town, but she pulled up my kids' calendar online, of school calendar, and she sent me, okay, I know Valentine's coming up, sent me all their Valentines. Okay, Easter's coming up, and sent me, a million different things for Easter baskets or Halloween costumes. And she was just taking something off my plate mentally, because I had, all these other things that I needed to do. And I had another friend she knew the phone calls took so long. So she would come over in the morning, bring me a Starbucks and say, I'll sit with Ryan, so you can go be on the phone. So again, I think you need to know people and whether they're going to resist it, but nobody's going to hate you for showing up and saying, I'm here to help. They can kick you out of their house, but that was so incredibly helpful, both of those things. And I'll always remember them.
That's great.
So Julie, the documents that you might need probably as soon as you partner up. And you and I, when we're working with clients, we say when you're 18, when your child turns 18, you no longer have any legal right to act on their behalf in a medical setting. So getting healthcare power of attorney for your 18-year-old or even the newly marrieds or the newly parents, healthcare powers of attorney so you can easily navigate HIPAA consent form, so you can easily navigate and not have to fight a legal battle to care for the one you love. I think that's super important. I was reading some statistics that the average age of a caregiver in the United States is 50 years old. And I thought it'd be a little bit older. But hearing the stories from today, you can understand where an average is the average of the young and the old put together. And that there's 42 million caregivers here in the United States today. And you had asked, Julie, what impact does it have on generally a woman's life? Generally, the woman is the caregiver, and oftentimes the oldest daughter is called into that role for their in-laws or their parents. It can be devastating to your career. So I was thinking about the three things that matter, it seems. You've got to communicate with your partner about these things before it happens, even when you're young. You've got to understand where the other one is coming from. And then you've got to find yourself standing alone in a stable position. So if you're relying on one spouse for income, let's make sure there's enough set aside for the first year or two if something happens, either disabling condition or death, either money set aside or shift the risk to an insurance policy. But the legal documents and the products available to help you no matter what stage of life you're in, you've got to communicate about it first, understand each other's position, and then find the stability.
Linda, I love that you brought in parents, but we know aging is coming and brings with it life changes. So when you think of all the women that are listening today who are like, I don't know what it's going to mean, but I know it's coming. Or my parents are aging, my spouse's parents are aging, and I know it's going to impact me. How do I really get prepared for helping aging parents or helping them deal with the death of a spouse at some point in the future? So how do we even start those conversations with our parents in a respectful way that they'll be open to? And what are some of the key things we need to do so that they know how to help when the time comes?
Listen to this podcast, because then it's going to open up the conversation and you say, wow, as I did last week, Mom, what if something were to happen to you where you broke a hip because she has a condition, what would you want to see happen? And she told me specifically where she wanted to go for rehab and then where she wanted to go after rehab. So we had a very specific conversation, but she knows that's my field. But I think for anyone listening, introduce the topic with this podcast. So make it already an icebreaker and then go from there.
Okay, Samantha, I know you all in FMG Suites provide some great information just on many topics relating to this. How do you help advisors get comfortable with that topic? It's not a financial, per se, the investment topics they're used to. So when your conversations with advisors, how do you help them lean into some of these topics and engage the women clients that they have?
We have a lot of financial life planning pieces. It's not, it is financial, but so much of it is just about life planning and not just the financial part of it. And some of them are about broaching those types of conversations. Some of the advisors we work with have helped their clients create if something happens, open this document type of a thing where it could be with the husband and the wife sitting down and saying everything from, this is where the legal documents are located, this is where financial documents, but even things like these are the passwords for Netflix. I think sounds kind of funny, but I remember, a good maybe year after my husband died, I changed all the credit cards, finally took his name off, and then I couldn't log into anything. And it was late at night, and I was trying to put a show on for my kids so I could go do laundry and pack lunches, and I couldn't get anything to work, and I just broke down in tears. And I think I love the idea of doing the same with your parents. I mean, my parents, my dad's about to turn 71. He's actually having a knee replacement surgery this month, and the surgery prompted us to have those kinds of conversations with him. So I do agree, like you mentioned the hip, Linda. I think sometimes when something like that's coming, it prompts the conversation. But what happens if you don't have something like that and then it's much more tragic? It's better to have a way to get started. So
That's so helpful to provide some of that path and share some best experiences so they aren't starting on their own. Angela, what about aging relatives, women you've seen go through it, or if you yourself have gone through starting those conversations? So it's like, how's this going to work, and what role is everyone going to play? That sometimes can be as touchy as the conversations with your parents.
Yeah, I haven't had these conversations with my siblings yet, but I'm the youngest of three sisters. We haven't had these conversations but we did have to have these conversations with my father, who passed away in 2014, and we had to have these conversations with him just around, what happens, what is going to happen next, as his health was declining. And they were not easy conversations to have, just around like, how do we plan for this? What do you want this to look like? And then that, what do you want this to look like, also turns into like, what's actually possible and what is plausible given like where we all are in our lives, and what is possible for us as possible caregivers. And what does the system support, and what does your income support, and what is all of this? So all of those kinds of things. And it did get a little bit sensitive, but my style is to just kind of march right into the conversation, and then like as the pieces kind of fall, we just kind of start to sweep them up a little bit. And I'm comfortable with that, but not everybody is comfortable with that kind of approach. So that was, and even among my sisters, they were not all comfortable with that approach. But that was the way that we kind of talked about that. But between my husband and I, the conversation started when we had our children, and we went in and we were talking about our will, and then we had life insurance conversation, and we were getting all that paperwork started and in order. And that was, I think, a much easier and more natural conversation, because we've always been very aligned about what is important and what are the values and all of that. And it was kind of just a natural kind of continuation of dialogue. And I think that kind of goes back to something I think, Linda, you were saying earlier about just like that ongoing, like alignment of interest, alignment of, just all of those conversations that should kind of naturally be happening as you're partnering. So that, I think, was how we landed into those conversations. But I do think it's challenging if that topic is never broached at any point in a relationship. And that's kind of where I think this podcast is trying to break through and help to open those doors, or kind of continue to encourage people to be having these types of conversations, because they should be happening on a regular basis. You're having relationships with people that you care about. Like, these should be regular topics of conversation. They should not be taboo. They should not be things that we're no longer, that we're not speaking about. We should be talking about these things. They should be out in the open. It shouldn't be things that, suddenly we're just discovering, like, we don't know these really important things about next steps in life and times that need to be easier for all of us. So
how many of us would think that in our families, we spend more time talking about where we're going on vacation or what restaurants we're eating at than end of life care decisions? What we do, but it is so important. And just that transparent conversations. Samantha, you mentioned, taking your husband off credit cards. If we were in 1970, we couldn't even open up a credit card on our own without our husband's signature. That blows my mind to think about it. It was that short of a period. So, but we still have women all the time. They have no credit score because they've never done anything on their own. So, Linda, just some things that like every woman should have. What are some of those just base financial knowledge, base understanding that even if you delegate a lot of that to your spouse, what do you need to know? What do you need to have?
I was laughing while you said that, and I will answer your question, Julie, but my first role model when I entered this business, just out of the 70s and the 80s, she was on her third marriage. And so she was driving me around to see clients, and she said, honey, I'm going to tell you some advice and you better listen up. She said, there's two things you need to know. One is you have to have a credit card in your name. Build your own credit score. She said, number two is you always call your husband honey because you might forget which one you're on. So with that,
Advice to live by.
I love it.
Words to live by. So I would definitely recommend that we all have our own credit score and credit history built up. I would also highly recommend, just as Samantha said, that we know all of the passwords to everything. That can be the most disabling thing. There are programs out there where you can secure your passwords and update them over time and allow one other person to access them. That seems like online the easiest way to go. I'm not endorsing anyone on this program, but we also at Baird have an estate organizer where if you like to do things handwritten in pencil so you can update it over time, that would be really awesome. But you've got to understand where your cash flow is coming from and have an inkling of your expenses. Life insurance, of course, is almost always a must. If it's just term for now, that's fine. But over the long term, you may want a different type of product. Disability or long-term care. Long-term care is a tough subject to broach. When I'm with clients, I ask them, what is the plan for a long-term care event? Not, do you have long-term care insurance? What is the plan of action? Are we dedicating an asset? Are we dedicating an investment asset? Who's going to care? And back to your discussion, if you can't have this conversation because we're not as bold as Angela, invite a CFP in, because the CFP standards now include a lot of behavioral finance. And that's intentional because we find ourselves as advisors in situations where we have to navigate conflict or uncomfortable situations. So sometimes it's easier with a third person. Powers of attorney would be the last piece that I would say is important.
Both financial and medical. Who do you really want to make those decisions? Which is when we talk about siblings, often we find that different siblings can step into those roles better. I mean, my dad passed 6 years ago, and when he knew that he wasn't going to last a couple more years, he's like, you're on the healthcare power of attorney. Your mom will not pull the plug. I'm counting on you to do it. And I knew his wishes, and I would have done it. He died naturally, but who is better able to help handle that? Who's better able to handle financial affairs? And sometimes it's geography. People are like, oh, we named the oldest child as everything on our power of attorney. Like, they live across the country from you. They're not going to be able to be there for what you need. So those discussions among siblings can be really important. One other thing, when you talked about early in your career, one of those moments that I will also never forget, I was doing a lot of 401k administration. I was a CPA in my 20s, and this lady called. Her husband had passed, and she wanted to talk about getting access to his 401k. I'm like, sure, come in. And she came in, and I said, how can I help you? And, Betty, I'm just so sorry. And her face immediately turned scarlet. And she's like, I'm not Betty, I'm Debbie. That was his first wife. I look back down at the beneficiary designation. I'm like, oh no. He forgot to change it. And they'd been married about 10 years, but he'd worked at this company for 30 years. So one of the other things I think as women, we need to ensure for our own and for our spouses, all beneficiary designations, that they're changed. My daughter, thrilled, is engaged, and she's going to be getting married this year. And we've already started this checklist. And she's like, oh, I can't wait to introduce him to my financial advisor. And I'm like, and you're going to change all your beneficiaries? She's like, oh, yeah, write it down. newly married still may have parents on his beneficiary designations. I was in one situation where someone was killed in an accident. They've been married about 5 years. Parents still on the Benny. So that's just a good thing to physically look at, not just kind of say, oh, I'm sure it's fine. Linda, how do you see women can deal with the reality that that might happen? I know I've heard you do it, talk to parents who have significant inheritance coming towards their children about prenups or some ways to structure things around that. That's a very delicate topic when people at the moment are happily married. So how do we help women make sure they're prepared for that curveball that may come their way or their child's or their sister's way? How do we help in that?
On the way in today, Trisha Yearwood was singing on the radio. Of course, we're in Nashville, so that's typical. And she was saying the toughest thing is to balance love and money. And you are absolutely right when it comes to divorce. Prenuptial agreements are sometimes used when there's wealth in the picture. Postnuptial agreements are extraordinarily hard because you've already made the commitment to each other, and now you're trying to define who's going to take what if you don't make it. So it's almost a cold air blowing right into your face. So if you find yourself already married and your spouse wants a post-nuptial agreement, the best advice is have your own legal counsel. It's really hard for one attorney to represent both parties properly. If there's an inheritance coming your way, we've got to talk to your parents about making sure that is protected for you or your husband if it's his family wealth. And we can do that through the use of trusts. We don't create them here at Baird, but we do advise on what's available and what might be appropriate for your situation. Divorce is really tricky. But again, it goes back to that communicate, understand. You've got to understand what goes on in your financial family. You don't have to do it all, but you've got to understand it all so you're not caught flat-footed or off guard. Those are my pieces of advice.
That's what you do every day is the hard stuff. You're helping people as they go through things and those unexpected curveballs. Any curveballs that we haven't talked about today, I'd say some of them are just our own careers, our own health issues, taking care of ourselves. As women, we just don't do that very well. Making it a priority, our own health, our own caregiving, making sure we have all of our things in order as well for us personally. So any comments anyone wants to make about just how do we take care of our own self in our daily lives?
I will say two things. For me, a big thing was I had a journal, and every morning I still do it, but a gratitude journal where I would just really focus on what's good and not what's bad, because it can always be worse, as my mom taught me from the time I was young. So while it's terrible that my husband has brain cancer and all these things, I'm grateful I can take care of him. I'm grateful that I did have the financial planning in place that, I could take a pause for my career. So I think trying to always find those silver linings, it's easier said than done, obviously, but it really, really helped. And then you asked if there was things, maybe we didn't cover or didn't think about. One thing that was it just caught me completely off guard was I tried to find someone once my husband was really confined to the house, couldn't walk anymore, couldn't feed himself just lifting him up and back. But a lot of the caregiving agencies, all of the workers are caring for the elderly typically. And so they don't have clearances to be in homes with children. And so that was not something I had really thought about, but it took a very long time to find someone that could work with us because they had to go through all this extra training and paperwork and money to get those clearances. So sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, but that's where those kinds of things were working with an advisor who's been through this before and understands. They can give you a heads up about starting the search, which is helpful before you actually even get there because it can take months to put these things in place.
Wow.
Great advice. And that reminds me, when you talk about resources, Samantha, that at Baird, we have a new member of our planning team, a colleague of Linda's, that has a healthcare background in Medicare and related things, but really he's now our database of everything. So a recent one that we added to his arsenal is to help with mental health or addiction treatment facilities. We have a consulting firm that will do all case management for clients in that situation. So we really try to be that comprehensive resource when you don't know where to start. And, I wouldn't have thought about that being such an issue. It makes sense, but never encountered it. Don't know till you don't know that could be a big issue. So helpful. Thank you.
So, so much, particularly in the household with women, rests on our shoulders. And if we are not well and whole and feeling good about things and cared for, then the things that we're responsible for cannot get done with the quality that they need to get done. And so it is important that we prioritize ourselves so that those things can happen and happen well. And there's a lot of guilt and that goes around, with regard to like, no, this is my time. I'm doing this for, I need to do this because, it's important. I need to be whole and I need to be well and I need to do these things so that I can pour out of this full cup for everyone else. And that's really important. And I know that a lot of people talk about that and there's a lot of rhetoric and everything about that, but it's the actual doing that is really important. So, so just giving ourselves the permission to actually act on that and put ourselves first, because that's really what matters. So
we've been talking a lot too about how to get people talking within families. There's two things that we've done, as part of our family culture forever, which we do. I don't know if you've ever heard the rose, the bud, and the thorn conversation. So at dinner, you ask, what was your rose, which was the best part of the day, the thorn, the worst part, and then the bud is a growth opportunity. And so we've always talked about that, whether we're with my parents, siblings, friends. But, I think if you are trying to start conversations, maybe about some of these uncomfortable topics, you could write some of your own. Like, what do you want to be remembered for after you pass away? And then starting to talk about death and then say, okay, when you die, do you want to be cremated or have a wake, and kind of like build them into that family culture of dinner time conversation.
Great thoughts. Great thoughts. Linda, close us out. What did we not cover today that you want to make sure our listeners?
I wanted to bring a couple more resources to the table that people don't often think about. Your employer may have resources to help you both with medical advocacy and employee assistance, as well as paid time off. So please don't forget about that. Our company has been really pushing hard in that direction, and I'm thankful. And also, I don't know if the listeners know that Social Security from your husband's work history sticks with you as long as you have children under the age of 18. But after that, you're in the widow's blackout period. If you're under age 60 and your children have left the home or have become adults, you're in a window where you have to figure it out on your own. So Social Security is a resource, but not all the time. So I just wanted to bring those things to the forefront before we left.
Great. Appreciate that so much.
thank you both for joining us. Samantha, where can our listeners find you or connect with you online if they'd like to know more about you and hear more about your expertise?
Yeah, thank you. If they go to LinkedIn, it's Samantha C. Russell. And then if you just go to fmgsuite.com, whether you're a current advisor using our services, you can log in and find a lot of the content we talked about there in the dashboard.
Excellent. And Linda, how about you? Where can our listeners connect with you?
The same on LinkedIn, Linda Grant-Smith, Grant Smith. And you can also access me through your Baird financial advisor. I'm there to support them in supporting you.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you both so much for being there.
Thank you. Thanks.